Spring came slow and bitter to the Nebraska plains in 1881, the kind of season that felt more like a punishment than a promise. Will Holt sat slumped against the barn wall, boots deep in mud, with a dark blood stain spreading across his shirt sleeve like spilled wine on faded cloth. He'd been shot the night before, not in some legendary gunfight or heroic standoff, but while helping a neighbor chase off two drunk men who'd gotten rough with a young girl in town. One of them had been quick with a pistol, or maybe Will had just been slow. Either way, he sat there alone, watching the blood dry, watching the morning struggle to break through the gray sky, and he couldn't find a single reason to move. The horses hadn't been fed. The Southfield gate had blown open in the night, scattering his yearlings across the prairie. The coffee pot had burned dry on the stove. And still, Will sat motionless, staring at the fence line where earth met sky, feeling an ache in his chest that had no name and wouldn't leave. Behind him stood the house that had watched him grieve for 3 years, ever since Callie died in childbirth and took their baby with her. The place seemed to mourn alongside him, sagging and warping like it was tired of standing. Floorboards buckled, shingles peeled away, and the front steps drooped like a mouth refusing to speak. Will had lived alone there so long he'd forgotten the sound of his own voice except when he talked to the horses. Grief clung to him like burrs on a coat, not killing him but keeping him bent, keeping him from ever standing fully upright again. The wind sent grit into his face, and he blinked it away with his good hand, breathing shallow and rough, unsure if the weakness came from blood loss or something deeper, something that had been draining out of him slowly for years. This was a man who had nothing left to lose, which meant he had nothing left to protect. And that's exactly when 2 children appeared at the edge of his field, walking toward him through the dust like they knew exactly where they were going. Will squinted through the haze and saw them clearly now, 2 small figures moving with purpose, not wandering lost but headed straight for him. The older one was a girl, maybe 10 years old, walking with stiff, stubborn steps, like someone who'd already seen too much and decided not to flinch anymore. The smaller child followed close behind, gripping the back of her coat with both hands, clutching a burlap sack to their chest like it held the only thing in the world that mattered. Children didn't belong out here on the empty plains, miles from anywhere, covered in dust and walking alone. Will tried to stand, but pain exploded white-hot through his shoulder and slammed him back down against the barn wall. His breath hissed through his teeth. The children kept coming. When they reached the edge of his yard, they stopped and looked at him, and he looked back, and nobody spoke. In that heavy silence, something shifted in the air between them, something unspoken but understood. The girl stepped forward first, not asking permission, not giving her name, just moving closer like the decision had already been made for all of them. Will cleared his throat, and his voice came out dry and cracked. "You two lost?" The girl shook her head once, firm and final. "No, sir." It wasn't the voice of a child, not really. There was something too old in it, too certain. He glanced at the smaller one. "Where are your folks?" The girl's jaw tightened and her eyes went hard. No words came. Will knew better than to ask again. Instead he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that something had been said between them without language, and he pushed himself to his feet using the barn wall for balance. The pain stabbed through his arm like hot iron, but he said nothing, just turned and walked toward the house. The children followed. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old smoke and the quiet mess of a man who hadn't expected visitors in years. Dishes sat unwashed in the basin. The coffee pot was blackened and ruined. The smell of ash and stale tobacco hung heavy in every corner. Will cleared a space on the table with his elbow, wincing, and the girl stayed near the door with tight shoulders, eyes scanning the room like it might turn on her at any moment. The smaller child stayed close, fingers gripping her sleeve. Will lit the oil lamp and shadows stretched long across the walls. "You hungry?" he asked. They nodded. He found half a loaf of cornbread, hard around the edges, and poured water into 2 tin cups, setting them on the table carefully like the act itself mattered more than the food. The smaller child ate fast, desperate, like the food might vanish if they slowed down. The girl ate slow, watching Will the whole time, her eyes flicking to the blood on his sleeve. "It's not bad," he said. She nodded. He sat across from them, cradling his injured arm. "What should I call you?" After a long pause, she said, "Marin." "And you?" he asked the smaller one. "This is Eli," Marin said. Will nodded. "You walked a long way." Marin didn't deny it. "Our mama's dead," she said finally, her voice steady as stone. "Been 3 days." Will waited. "Our uncle was supposed to come," she added. "He didn't." That was all she said, but there was more written in the way she held herself tight, like fence wire pulled too hard, ready to snap. Will looked at these 2 children who'd walked across the prairie alone and buried their mother, and been abandoned by the only family they had left, and he said, "You can stay the night. House ain't much, but it's dry." Marin nodded once. He showed them to the small room that had once been Callie's sewing room, pulled a quilt from the cedar chest, and handed it to her. "You'll be warm enough." Before closing the door, he paused. "You got any kin worth finding?" Marin looked at him for a long moment and then shook her head. He closed the door. Back in the kitchen, Will poured the last of the whiskey into a chipped glass and listened to the fire crackle low. Outside, the wind eased into softer quiet. Down the hall, floorboards creaked, small footsteps moved and stopped. It had been a long time since anyone but him had walked these rooms. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years the silence didn't feel like it was crushing him. Will woke before dawn with pain dragging him back to the world, his arms stiff and burning beneath dried blood. Frost clung to the windows. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside to find Marin already at the woodpile, struggling with a dull hatchet nearly as long as her arm. She didn't stop when she saw him. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she answered. He took the hatchet gently and split the log one-handed, the crack of wood echoing sharp in the cold. "You'll learn," he said. "Start the stove. Eli can help." She took the wood and led Eli inside. By midday the children had fed the chickens, hauled water, and cleaned the hearth. Marin worked like someone who knew she had no other choice, and Eli stayed quiet but closer now, watching everything. That afternoon Will rode out to check the fence and Eli followed partway, dragging a rope. "You shouldn't be out here," Will said. Eli looked down. "You're bleeding again." Small fingers pressed a rag against his wound, gentle as snow. That night they ate beans and salt pork together, and the wind rattled the windows, but the house felt less hollow. Will watched the children lean against each other, half asleep, and for the first time in years the place didn't feel like it was waiting to collapse. It felt like something had begun. The days settled into rhythm like quiet snow, nothing dramatic, no speeches or promises, just work, the kind that filled hours and kept grief from getting too loud. Will's arm healed slow and Marin watched closely, learning without asking. Each morning came cold and more than once Will found Marin already awake, pulling on her coat, waiting. "You don't need to prove anything," he told her. "I know," she said. "But I want to help." So he taught her everything. How to milk the goat without startling it, how to tell when a fence post was going soft, how to read the sky for weather before clouds ever showed. Marin listened the way dry ground listens to rain, not wasting a word. Eli stayed quieter but changed in small ways, wandering farther from the porch each day, watching Will sharpen tools, building crooked little fences from sticks. One cold morning Will wrapped a wool blanket around them both and lifted Eli onto the old mare. The horse walked slow along the field edge, steam rising from its breath. Eli didn't speak, but when they climbed down there was a small light in their eyes that hadn't been there before. That night Marin swept ashes from the stove while Will rewrapped his arm. She spoke without looking up. "We can stay for a while, right?" Will paused. "You can stay as long as you want." Her shoulders dropped just a little, like something heavy had finally been set down. They didn't talk much about the past. Will didn't ask. But some nights, long after the lamp was low, he heard Marin crying into her pillow, quiet and stubborn, and he stayed awake until the sound stopped. Weeks passed, and the prairie softened. Calves were born shaky but alive. The windmill creaked and turned for the first time in years. One afternoon Will came back from town with flour and sugar and a bundle of cloth Marin had asked for. He also carried a letter. They sat at the table while he unfolded it. "I asked the sheriff about your uncle," Will said. Marin's face went still. "He's in Dodge. Been there a while. Not looking for anyone." She swallowed hard. "I figured," she said. "He doesn't want you," Will said plainly. "I know." They sat in silence. Eli reached across the table and touched Marin's sleeve. "You still have a choice," Will said. "What choice?" Marin asked, bitterness sharp in her voice. "You're here," Will said. "That means something." She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them, not love yet but recognition, the understanding that they'd all been broken in different ways, and maybe broken things could build something new together. That night Will took a folded paper from the hutch drawer and slid it across the table. "It's the land deed," he said. "Place is paid for. Could be more than just mine." Marin stared at it like it might burn her. "We could stay," Eli whispered. Will nodded. Marin touched the corner of the paper with shaking fingers. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something solid. The next snow came soft and steady. Eli built a snow creature by the porch. Marin hauled wood, and Will shoveled despite the ache in his shoulder. That afternoon a dog limped into the yard, ribs showing, eyes dull, and lay down from pure exhaustion. Marin offered bread, and the dog took it gentle. "It belonged to someone," Will said. Eli named it Scout. 3 days later a rider came down the south trail. Will saw the dust first and stepped onto the porch, rifle resting in his hands. The man dismounted stiffly, eyes already on the house. "Looking for 2 kids," the man said. "Girl named Marin." Will felt his chest tighten. "They're here," Will said. "And they're not going with you." The man sneered. "They belong to me." Marin stepped into the doorway, Eli behind her, Scout pressed close. "We don't," Marin said. The man spat into the snow. "Ain't worth it." He rode away without another word. That night Marin shook hard while Scout slept at her feet. "He won't come back," Will said. "What are we then?" she asked. Will looked at her. "A family, if you want to be." She leaned against his shoulder just for a moment, and that was enough. Spring came strong after that, and they fixed the porch together, built a chicken run, and Will brought home school books. The Lindholm family stopped by with jam and seeds. Laughter returned to the house, soft at first then real. Eli drew pictures of the 3 of them, one showing a house with a name beneath it, Holt Place. Will folded it and kept it close. Summer came on strong and the land answered back with green. Corn pushed up in rough rows. Wildflowers bloomed along the fence line, and Eli brought them inside by the handful, setting them in chipped jars on the windowsills. The house no longer groaned like it wanted to give up. Marin patched the roof with tar and nails and quiet patience. They whitewashed the porch posts together, and Eli painted the shutters blue with tongue stuck out in focus. Will watched it all without saying much, the way a man watches a fire he doesn't want to spook. One evening he came in late from the field with a deep splinter in his palm, and Marin sat him down and cleaned it without being asked. "You've got a steady hand," he said. "Had to," she replied. "You could be a doctor someday." She gave a small smile. Maybe. They ate supper on the front steps that night, beans and bread, the air smelling like dirt and with smoke. Eli went back for seconds, and Scout lay with his head on Will's boot, while the sky faded slow and wide. After a while Marin spoke. "I remember the day Mama died." Will didn't interrupt. She was coughing blood, couldn't sit up. "I tried to go for help, but my uncle said she wasn't worth the trouble." Marin's voice stayed even. "I sat with her, told her I'd take care of Eli." Eli looked down, and Scout pressed closer. "I buried her with a spoon," Marin said. "I was too small to use the shovel." Will reached over and placed his hand on her shoulder, not heavy, just there. "She'd be proud of you," he said. Marin nodded, her eyes wet, but she didn't cry. A week later the schoolhouse reopened, and the teacher wrote out herself. "They're welcome," she said. "Both of them." Marin hesitated when Will told her, then nodded. "I want to go." They started the next week, and Will hitched the wagon each morning, watching as they walked the rest of the way together. The house felt too quiet when they were gone, so Will filled the hours whittling small things: a toy horse, a picture frame, a latch for Eli's box of treasures. Harvest came slow, and the fields turned gold. One evening Eli laid out drawings on the table showing horses, the house, 3 figures standing close, and on the last page a name written careful and proud: Holt Place. Will folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket like something sacred. Autumn settled in, and the nights grew cold again. One morning Will found Marin in the barn stitching an old saddle. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "I did once," Will said. "After Callie died, I didn't know where to go." "Why didn't you?" "Something told me to stay." Marin tied off the stitch and looked up. "Maybe you were waiting for us." Will met her eyes and nodded. "Maybe I was." That night after supper Will brought out a small wooden box and set it on the table. Inside were pieces of his life: a photograph of Callie, a locket, a flattened bullet, an old letter. "She wanted a family here," Will said. "Thought I'd miss my chance." He took out another paper, clean and new, and placed it in front of Marin. "What is it?" she asked. "Name transfer," he said. "The land, the house, all of it." Marin stared. "You don't have to." "I know," Will said. "That's why I want to." Eli looked up, eyes wide. "So it's ours?" "Ours," Will said. That night Will stood on the porch long after the house went quiet, the lamp burning warm against the dark. He thought of the years before, of dust and silence and loss. Now there was laughter inside, footsteps light. The plains were still wide and still harsh, but something strong had been built here, not just a home, but a future. And that's how the whole place became known, not because of a great man or a grand deed, but because a broken cowboy bleeding in the mud opened his door to 2 children walking through the dust, and together they built a family from nothing but grief and hope and the stubborn refusal to give up. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about heroes who save the world, they're about ordinary people who save each other, one small act of kindness at a time, until the broken pieces finally fit together into something whole.